And there's two folds to the narrative, right? You have the narrative that's given, and then there's the narrative that you speak to yourself. So there's so many layers to the narrative, but sometimes these catchphrases tries to lump sum everything in there so that you can tuck in the fine print. And as they say, the devil is in the fine print. Like, that's not just a cliche term. That's an actual reality. The lower vibrations sneak in through the details. And we're not taught to look at details. We're taught to consume. Like you were talking about earlier, you talked about how they call us consumers. So if you're being called a consumer, that's a narrative. And then you think, I'm a consumer. I need to buy this. I need to get this. I need to go here. That's now the narrative is playing in you because of the power of word, which aligns itself back to what the Most High did in the beginning when he created us in his image and likeness.
Right.
When you're made in the image and likeness, Most High said, let there be light. And then there was light. There was a formation. There was a process. And then it became. So right now, if we're sowing seeds of all of these different agendas and ideals that are contrary to nature, contrary to human productivity or health, what type of fruit are we going to get? What type of narratives are going to grow from that initial narrative or seed that was planted, which goes to the identity. How do you identify? How do you see yourself? What is your identity? And if you've been stripped, like you talk about within the Afro spaces where there's a trauma-based economy, as they say, there's trauma in the TV, the movies, the so forth and so on. If you're constantly seeing these imaging of being subpar, below, as they call it, sub-Sahara, which would be lower, or, we talk about understanding versus overstanding, or they talk about how the Savior came, that he might destroy the works of Satan or the lower vibration and to liberate, right? So liberation isn't just economic, which is a part of it. It's not just social, but it starts in the mental. So we go back to, once again, in our last podcast, we talked about the Greco-Roman framework is built into the New Testament. So if you understand that and you read the New Testament with that understanding, then you can understand where things are right now and how it's cyclically happening and is multiplying, because the New Testament is the beginning of Western culture. It is the beginnings of Western culture because it started with the Greeks. The Greeks were the first European entity to really gain like a world dominance of a sort, with civilization after it, coming into the garden, or AKA Africa, whether you want to call it Kemet, and then it got, as scholars would say, was whitewashed into Egypt, or if you want to call it, if you want to go further back into Abu Kalon, Sahara slave trade, when the Muslims and Arab situations were happening, Sahara slave trades and things of that nature that was going on. Or if you want to go all the way back to the book of Genesis, where it called it the land of, some would call Ham, or it could be Japheth, depending on how you look at that. But that's a whole nother conversation that we'll talk about at another time. But understanding the identity, the scriptures talk about in the New Testament, which a lot of it is referenced off of the old, and that's a whole nother conversation, whether old or new. Mm-hmm. But for conversation's sake, the New Testament talks about how Paul says that the weapons are not physical. Mm-hmm. The greatest weapons are not physical, but they're imaginations and thoughts. Mm-hmm. What is he talking about? Narrative. Ultimately, what narrative is being spoken or you receive is what's going to show up into the physical space. Mm-hmm. So if we overstand those principles, if you keep telling somebody, you stupid, man, you dumb, I'm going to always be broke, or whatever narrative you believe or have been told or you see, whether it be through media, through TV, through music, like you said in our previous podcast, where the music, especially me working in hip hop, hearing, always talking about our women in a certain way, or talking about finances, or talking about the struggle, or every song has a formula or a remedy or a narrative that perpetuates itself so that it becomes commonplace and normalized. Once something becomes normalized, that means it's sealed in the subconscious and in the spirit, as we call it, or in your mind, and then it's going to just replicate itself. So when you say, well, why y'all keep killing each other? Well, after a period of time, now it's on autopilot. You don't have to really do anything, because now it's just going to be itself.